under Black Hollow and then vanished. Evelyn found Black Hollow because she kept looking for seams. The house she'd inherited had thin floors and papers that smelled of coal and old rain. She cataloged everything the way an archivist does, ordering, naming, folding the past into neat stacks. The map came tucked in a ledger, edges browned, and a single place circled in ink: Black Hollow. The town called it a depression, a bog with bad jokes tied to its name. To Evelyn, it read like a question. Mr. Colby answered the knock on his screened porch like someone answering a long-standing regret. He remembered the hollow differently, as a patch where children once sledded, then a place people avoided when winter came late. His mouth tightened when Evelyn mentioned the map. He recommended salt and small rituals, half smiles that meant he wanted her to stop asking. When she turned back toward the lane, the late sun made the wet ground glassy, and the hollow looked only like a shallow bowl, breathing. Evelyn walked to the hollow on a weekday that smelled of rain and old leaves. The map led her along blind hedgerows and a ruined stone fence. Stones that should have lain in order were tipped and blank, as if anyone could rearrange them overnight. Up close, the marker stones held faint scratches, glyphs without an alphabet. She knelt, brushing moss away, until the air seemed to thicken. Something in the depression felt tuned to that scraping, as though whatever it was leaned toward attention. She found the whistle beneath a tuft of grass, metal dulled to the color of old bones. When she breathed into it, the sound was thin and too precise, like the note of a tuning fork for forgotten things. The hollow answered not with sound, but with a certain rearrangement of space. A twig she hadn't touched shifted. A scent she had associated with childhood returned compressed and wrong. Standing up, Evelyn felt the map burning in her pocket, as if ink were warm with a life of its own. That night, the house rearranged itself in the small, insidious ways of grief. A box she swore she'd left on a shelf appeared open on the floor, a cup turned upside down. Evelyn woke with the whistle in her hand, though she did not remember picking it up. Dreams braided with maps, roads folding into themselves, a handwriting that was hers, and not, until waking, felt like surfacing from another mouth. She told herself that tiredness made the edges blur. She told herself a lot of things. Neighbors stopped recognizing details. Mrs. Greeley could not remember the farmhouse's missing porch swing. Someone at the post office thought Evelyn's name belonged to a woman who'd moved away years ago. When she showed the map to Colby, his brows went flat and distant. He looked at the circle, and then at her, as if he had seen a trick played by a mirror. Memory, she found, was a public thing that could thin and snip when you poked it. The town's certainty felt brittle. She marked the map's circle with a little scrap of cloth and returned to the hollow at dusk, when everything lost its labels. The marker stones lay in a new order. Gaps in the pattern made her feel watched by geometry. She began to dig, not out of want for treasure, but to test whether the world conformed to her curiosity. The spade found peat, then a layer of silt, then a cavity that smelled like vertical rain. Inside lay a small wooden box. Inside that, a scrap of paper with her own handwriting, folded to hide a single line: "I'm almost home." The paper unmade a certainty. Her name looped in her own ink, but the sentence had the ease of something written by someone who had rehearsed leaving. She kept the scrap folded against her chest and felt, for the first time, the hollow listening with a patient intelligence. Returning home, she found rooms in the farmhouse that rented their hours to shadows. Objects she'd catalogued were now cataloging her. The sense that things had been watching her without malice became a heavier thing. Intent. Days eroded. People's faces smeared at the edges of conversations, her questions looped into polite disinterest. She set marker stones by her back door, an act of defiance, and of mapping the house as if it were terrain, and each morning found them moved closer to the hollow, neat as breadcrumbs. Once, she swore she saw her reflection ripple, and for a blink, the woman looking back had a smear of soil on her cheek that the mirror insisted was there, and then was not. The ground was learning her shape. She tried to tell someone who could translate grief into procedure. The county sheriff listened until his pen grew bored, and then left her with an appointment card. They suggested therapy, they suggested sleep. Evelyn brought them the map, the whistle, the folded note. Each person took an item, turned it over, and the item buckled under scrutiny into harmlessness. When the sheriff held the whistle, his eyes shied away, and he handed it back with a steadying laugh that did not reach his throat. Language failed to bind what was happening. The hollow began to ask for more than attention. At night, a low sound moved through the floorboards, not quite wind, not quite breath, like a throat clearing for weather. Evelyn dreamed of being lowered into the earth in stages, first by memory, then by people forgetting her name in conversation, until it fell away like a label from a jar. She woke to find the marker stones from her back door, forming a neat, grieving circle around the farmhouse's foundation, as if the land itself wanted to tidy what it would take. On the last clear evening, she went willingly. The whistle hung from her neck. The map was folded and creased to soft obedience. She walked the lane by memory of inches, not by sight. The town's lamps blinked in the distance like second-hand stars. At the hollow, she laid her hands on the earth and listened. The world answered with an almost kindness. She began to step down into the shallow bowl, expecting resistance, expecting to fight asleep. Instead, the ground took her quietly, like a tide taking a stone placed at just the right moment. In the morning, the farmhouse sat like any house does, doors locked, curtains living their appointed life. People spoke of the woman who'd passed through and moved on, yet no photograph showed her face in any meaningful way. The map surfaced on the threshold of the farmhouse, weeks later, edges softer than before. Ink smudged into the suggestion of a route that no one could quite agree existed. When someone finally unfolded it to understand, all they found in neat, trembling handwriting was a single, quiet line. I am exactly where I thought I might be. The rest was blank.